Welcome to Spilling Tea, the place where we stop pretending, stop minimizing, and start telling the truth about the patterns we've lived through. It's a place where we're going to explore the questions that most people want to avoid, the very questions that make us pause, breathe, and reflect on who we are. I'm your host, Colleen, and before we dive into today's conversation, I want to share something personal with you. Along with my friend Erin, I've waited to start this podcast since 2019. Anybody that knew me back then knows this to be absolutely true. We had the vision, we bought the equipment, we felt all of that excitement that comes with dreaming something into existence. And then 2020 happened. The world shut down, life completely flipped upside down, and Erin ended up moving out of state. And suddenly, the momentum that we built just stopped. But the dream never left. The idea never quieted down. It stayed with me, patiently waiting for me to come back to it. And eventually I realized something important. There is no perfect time. There's no perfect moment, no ideal alignment, no magical point where everything just feels ready. There is only the choice to start. So here I am, finally pressing record on something that my heart has been holding on to for years. And before we begin, I want to share a little bit of additional great news. I found out that Erin is moving back to Pennsylvania, so that means you'll be seeing both of us collaborating on this platform very soon as originally intended. And I can't wait for you guys to experience the energy that the two of us are going to bring to this podcast. Today also marks something special. This is the very first episode of Spilling Tea. It's going to be one of a 4-part series where we're going to explore trust, betrayal, character, and the red flags that we often miss before our relationships fall apart. And we're opening with a big one. It's a topic that touches love, loyalty, morality, and self-image. It's a topic that's going to make some people uncomfortable. Definitely will make some people defensive, but it's going to get everybody thinking, which is what I'm ultimately after. So here's a real question that I have for you. Is cheating just a moment of weakness, or is it a window into somebody's character? Let's slow this down. Let's go deeper than the surface. Let's really unpack it together. Are you guys ready to dive in? So before I feel like we can decide or have the conversation whether cheating is a mistake or a character trait, I feel like we have to slow it down and define what cheating actually means, because here's the truth. It's not a one-size-fits-all concept. For some people, cheating is strictly physical, kissing somebody else, sleeping with somebody else, crossing a very clear but a very tangible physical boundary. And for many, that line feels pretty obvious, but for others, like yours truly, cheating goes far beyond physical touch. Emotional intimacy can absolutely be cheating. And by emotional intimacy, I mean the private conversations you weren't meant to be shut out of, but you were. The deleted text messages, the secrecy, the lies and the half-truths used to cover it all up. The excuses that didn't quite add up, but your belly was telling you, something feels weird. Like, I feel sick about this, and I can't put my finger on it, but something is wrong. The emotional bonding that builds between two people when one of them already belongs to somebody else. It's the sharing of thoughts, feelings, and vulnerability with someone who had no right to that space to begin with. And for many people, that hurts just as deeply, sometimes even more so than the something physical, because emotional cheating doesn't just threaten the relationship, it erodes trust from the inside out. So at its core, cheating is this. It's a violation of trust within an agreement you claim to honor with another person. Whether that agreement was spoken or assumed, formal or emotional, it existed. Cheating is not just about the act itself. It's about broken expectations, broken safety, broken honesty. And yes, cheating is an action, but actions don't just show up randomly. They have roots, they have patterns, they have triggers, they have meaning. They come from unmet needs, poor boundaries, entitlement, fear, avoidance, and insecurity, sometimes all at once like a tsunami. Which brings us to the real question behind the conversation. When somebody cheats, are we witnessing a momentary lapse in judgment, or are we being shown something deeper about who that person is, how they value honesty and responsibility and respect? That distinction matters because how we define cheating shapes what we will be willing to tolerate, what we will forgive, and what we will need to walk away from. And that's exactly what we're here to explore. So let's start with the idea that cheating is a mistake. A poor decision was made in a moment of weakness, a choice that doesn't reflect who a person truly believes they are. An action that feels out of alignment with their values, their intentions, and even their self-image. This perspective exists for a reason, and for some people, it genuinely fits. Here's why many people will believe that cheating can be a mistake rather than a defining trait. First, humans are emotional beings. We're not logical machines. We don't always act from clarity. We act from feelings, and feelings, they can be messy. Even kind, well-intentioned people can make reckless choices when they're feeling stressed or lonely, insecure, overwhelmed, feeling unseen, craving validation or, relevance, trying to escape discomfort instead of confronting it. In those moments, the desire to feel wanted or connected or temporarily relieved can override long-term values. That doesn't make the behavior okay, but it can explain how someone ends up crossing a line they never planned to cross. Second, context matters. Most people don't wake up one morning thinking, today I'm going to destroy somebody's trust in me. Cheating often happens when something inside the relationship or inside that person is broken, maybe neglected, unmet emotional needs, avoided conversations, growing distance, maybe fear of conflict or abandonment, or simply not just knowing how to ask for what they need in a healthy way. Again, explanation is not justification, but understanding context helps us understand motivation. Third, guilt can tell us a whole heck of a lot about this on this topic. Some people feel immediate remorse. They don't rationalize it. They don't hide behind excuses. They don't point fingers. This is your fault. You made me do this. We were on a break. They say things like, this isn't who I am. I can't believe I did this. I crossed my own boundaries. That guilt matters because guilt suggests something really important. There's a disconnect between who they believe themselves to be and what they actually did. Their conscience is still intact. Their values still exist, even if they failed to act in alignment with them in that moment. And when guilt leads to accountability, honesty, repair, and real change, it strengthens the argument that what happened was truly a mistake. But, and this is the part that matters the most, a mistake is only a mistake once. When the same behavior repeats, when apologies replace change, when remorse disappears, when promises are broken again and again, we're no longer talking about a lapse in judgment. We're talking about a pattern. And patterns just don't describe behavior. They describe ding, ding, ding character, which leads us to the other side of this conversation. Now, this is going to be the part where there might be some uncomfortable people, but we got to get into it because sometimes cheating isn't a mistake at all. Sometimes it is a mirror. Some people argue, and I tend to agree with this, that cheating can definitely be a character trait. It's not a bad decision. It's not confusion. It's not heartbreak. It's a reflection of somebody's values, their boundaries, and their integrity. Here's why. First, patterns don't lie. People lie. If somebody cheats once, we can talk about circumstances. If somebody has cheated in every relationship they've had, we're done talking about coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's not picking the wrong partners. I'm the victim. That's not misunderstanding monogamy. It's not, anything other than a behavioral pattern. And patterns reveal how somebody handles temptation, accountability, respect when nobody is forcing them to behave. At some point, repeating the same betrayal stops being a mistake. It becomes a personality feature. Second, entitlement is loud. And, even when it's unspoken, we see that in today's society. We live in a very entitled society. Some people move, or I should say slink through relationships, believing the rules apply to everybody but them. They want the loyalty and the devotion and the forgiveness and patience while quietly collecting attention and admiration and options on the side behind your back. They don't stumble into cheating, they authorize it. This is an impulsive behavior. It's a mindset. And once somebody believes they deserve more than they're willing to give, cheating becomes inevitable. It's not accidental. Third, the absence of guilt tells you everything. When somebody cheats and feels nothing meaningful, no remorse, no discomfort, no empathy, that's not emotional overwhelm, that's emotional vacancy. And sometimes the cruelty isn't the cheating itself, it's kind of what happens after. You can sit across from somebody and hand them your pain fully exposed. You can cry. You can explain things clearly, calmly, without theatrics, how deeply they hurt you. And they will just sit there and twist the story until they become the victim. That's not misunderstanding. That's self-preservation at the expense of somebody else's reality, which now probably feels very similar to hell for them. And that is absolutely a character issue. I actually have some experience with this one. I was once in a relationship that I put on pause, not because I didn't care, but because I was never a priority. His energy went to the friends and the clubs and the drinking. And if we're being honest, it doesn't take a genius to understand the disadvantage that creates in a relationship. So I stopped things. I made my needs very clear to him. But during that pause, he stayed close. He texted me daily. He called. He said he loved me, said he wanted to fix things, said that he needed me. I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Right. He told me explicitly that he was still being faithful, that even though things were fractured and even though we were on a pause or a breakup, he wasn't crossing lines because he ultimately wanted to work things out. That detail matters because those words weren't neutral. They weren't casual. They created an expectation. He kept himself emotionally tethered to me while asking for my patience, my hope, my emotional availability. And he positioned himself as somebody serious about repair, somebody that's maybe going to choose commitment this time, even during a time of uncertainty. And that's why what happened next just wasn't hurtful. It was deceptive. Behind those reassurances, behind those I love yous and I want to fix this, he gave himself permission to cross the line anyway. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't miscommunication. That wasn't a gray area. That was a conscious decision to keep me emotionally engaged with him while acting in a way that directly contradicted what he was telling me. And when I found out, when I finally saw that his words and his actions didn't align, I didn't react out of nowhere. I reacted to betrayal layered on top of manipulation. Because here's the truth. If you're not serious about prioritizing somebody, you don't get to keep accessing them emotionally. If you're not committed to fixing a deeply fractured relationship, you don't get to ask somebody to wait in good faith while they get to act in bad faith. He should have left me alone, but instead he stayed and he reassured and he promised and he broke every single one of those promises. And when I finally said I'm done, I'm pretty confident you're going to know what happened next. Yeah, he blamed me. That was the final confirmation because I didn't end things because he made a mistake. I ended things because he chose dishonesty, entitlement, and self-preservation over integrity. A pause or a breakup with emotional hooking is not a loophole. And faithfulness doesn't only exist in definitions. It exists in intent, consistency, and restraint. If you say you're staying loyal because you want to fix a relationship, you don't get to rewrite that truth when your actions finally come to light. Fourth, emotional detachment shouldn't be mistaken for freedom. Some people actually don't bond deeply, not because they can't be charming and not because they don't feel attraction, but because real emotional attachment requires presence. It requires vulnerability. And those things are uncomfortable for them unless if they're with their friends. So instead of investing, they skim. They slink through relationships after relationships at a surface level. They enjoy the connection without commitment. They enjoy the affection without accountability, but ultimately, they enjoy the intimacy without the consequence. They avoid the kind of closeness that demands consistency because real intimacy doesn't just feel good. It asks something of you. It asks you to show up, even when it's inconvenient, to regulate your impulses, to consider the impact of your choices on the people that you love, to sit with discomfort instead of reaching for an escape. For people like this, intimacy feels restrictive, not relational. So when they cheat, it doesn't register as betrayal in their nervous system. It doesn't feel like a violation of trust. It feels like relief, like autonomy and independence. Probably also feels like they're reclaiming some control. And sometimes, if we're being honest, it probably feels like power to them. Power over secrecy, over narrative, over somebody who is investing deeply while they remain unbound. When somebody repeatedly violates trust without internal conflict, without guilt, that changes behavior, without discomfort that leads to repair. What you're seeing isn't situational weakness. It's structural. It's emotional architecture. It's the internal frameworks that governs how you bond, how you justify harm, how you protect yourself at somebody else's expense. And when cheating shows up inside that framework, it becomes incredibly informative because cheating in this context doesn't reveal confusion. It reveals priorities. It shows how somebody treats trust when protecting it costs them something they want. It shows what they value when nobody's watching, when no one is enforcing the rules, when accountability is optional. And it exposes whether remorse is real or just strategic. Because real remorse leads to change. Performance leads to repetition. Sometimes the tears are real, but the transformation isn't. Sometimes the apology sounds right, but the behavior never moves. Sometimes I'm sorry is just a tool to reset access to you. And that's why in these cases, cheating isn't really about who somebody betrayed. It's about who they've always been when intimacy asks more of them than they're willing to give. It's about the version of themselves they protect, even if it means leaving harm in their wake. And ultimately, it's about who they are unwilling to become, because becoming different would require accountability, restraint, self-growth, self-control, all of those fun things. And that right there is where character lives. So here's where things are going to get really interesting. I love psychology. I love reading about it, love to know how the mind works. But I do know that psychology almost never deals in absolutes, and in particular on this topic, it tended to land right in the middle, which I expected, but I was also annoyed. Because research shows that cheating can be influenced by a mix of internal traits and external conditions, like personality traits, childhood experiences, attachment styles, coping skills, yada, yada, yada. In other words, cheating is rarely just something that somebody did, and it's rarely just who somebody is. It's usually the intersection of situation, emotion, and inner wiring. For some people, cheating emerges during periods of emotional distress or insecurity, especially for those with like an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. They may use cheating as a form of regulation to soothe anxiety, to feel wanted or relevant, or to escape emotional discomfort instead of addressing it like an adult. And that's where context matters. But psychology also tells us something even more uncomfortable and dark, and this is kind of like where my curiosity peaked. Certain personality structures are statistically more associated with repeated guilt-free infidelity. Researchers often point to something that's called the dark triad. It's a cluster of traits. I'm pretty confident that we've all heard about the first one. It's narcissism. The next one I've never heard of before. I'm pretty confident I'm probably going to butcher the way that's pronounced. So if there's anybody like psychology major listening, please feel free to correct me, but I'm going to do my best. I believe it's pronounced Machiavellianism, hopefully. And then the third one is psychopathy. So I'm pretty sure that we've all heard about at least two of the three. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean that everybody who cheats is a psychopath. I mean, we may feel that way in the moment, but that's not what the research says. What it does say is this: people high in these psychopathic traits tend to show shallow emotional attachment, low empathy, severe entitlement, severe impulsivity, severe deceitfulness, they're always lying, and a striking lack of internal conflict after they harm somebody else. Sound familiar? And when individuals high in these traits cheat, the behavior often looks different. There's no guilt, there's no remorse, there's no motivation to change. Instead, we see rationalization. We see blame shifting. It's your fault that I did this. We see narrative control, and sometimes performative apologies that are more about regaining access to you than taking responsibility. In these cases, cheating isn't driven by emotional overwhelm or relationship breakdown. It's driven by self-orientation, by the belief that rules are negotiable and boundaries apply until they're inconvenient, that other people's emotional pain is secondary or irrelevant compared to their own desires. I know it sounds pretty sick and twisted. Psychology would call this not a momentary failure, but a personality-linked behavioral tendency. And that's why repeated cheating without accountability is such a powerful data point. Because when somebody repeatedly violates trust, they feel little or no guilt. They show no lasting change and continues the behavior across different partners. Gross. What you're seeing is not stress, not confusion, not circumstance. You're seeing structure. You're seeing that emotional architecture we talked about earlier, the internal framework that dictates how somebody relates to others, how they regulate their impulses, and justifies harm. So from a psychological standpoint, cheating can absolutely reveal character, not because one action defines a person, but because patterns, reactions, and lack of empathy do. Cheating shows us how someone treats trust when honoring it costs them something, when they value when accountability is optional, and whether remorse leads to transformation or not, or it just simply resets the cycle. And sometimes the most important insight psychology offers us is this: cheating isn't always about desire, which kind of shocked me. It's not about dissatisfaction or temptation. Sometimes it's about a person's capacity or lack thereof for empathy or self-control and responsibility. And that distinction does matter because it changes how we interpret apologies, how we assess promises, and how we decide whether something is repairable or whether we are asking somebody to become someone that they're simply unwilling or unable to be. So calling cheating a mistake does not excuse it. And calling cheating a character trait does not mean a person is permanently doomed or incapable of change. What matters isn't in the label. What matters is what happens next, the aftermath, because the aftermath of cheating tells us far more than the act itself ever could. This is where accountability lives. So ask yourself this question: what does the person do after the truth comes out? Do they hide it? Do they lie until they're cornered instead of coming forward voluntarily? Do they deny? Do they minimize it? Do they rewrite it so it wasn't that bad or it didn't mean anything? You're overreacting. It really wasn't cheating. We were on a break. Do they shift blame? This is your fault. Do they point to their unmet needs? Do they point to stress? Do they point to you, your reaction to certain things, specifically their behavior, your boundaries that you created that threaten them, your expectations of them, as if all of those things somehow cause them to make that very destructive choice? Do they play the victim? They're more upset about being caught than about the pain that they actually caused you. And most importantly, do they repeat the behavior? Because repeated betrayal after apologies tells you something very essential. The words may be sincere, but the willingness to change is not. Accountability does not sound loud or dramatic. Accountability looks like ownership without excuses. It looks like staying present with discomfort instead of escaping it. It looks like understanding the harm caused without being defensive. It sounds like, I did this, I understand why it hurt you, and I don't expect your forgiveness, but here's what I'm doing to make sure this doesn't happen again. And real growth isn't declared, it's demonstrated. Growth shows up as changed behavior, not just emotional reactions. It shows up when nobody's watching to give you kudos. When temptation appears again, and the choice is now different. Because growth requires more than guilt. Guilt is a feeling and growth is a commitment. And growth usually involves a lot of hard work, self-reflection, uncomfortable truths, learning boundaries, confronting entitlement, and sometimes you need some professional help. If somebody truly sees cheating as a violation of their values, their response will be consistent over time, not intense for a moment and forgotten later. That's the difference. Apologies without change are not accountability. They're damage control. Promises without follow-through. It's not repair, it's delay. So whether cheating was a mistake or a trait isn't answered in the moment it happens, it's answered in what follows, because growth or the refusal to grow is where responsibility lives. And responsibility is what determines whether trust can ever be rebuilt or whether walking away is the healthiest choice that you can make. So if you're hoping for a simple, clean answer like I was, there really isn't one. Cheating doesn't live in a single box. It doesn't come from one place. One choice tells us what somebody did, but repetition tells us who somebody is. Patterns reveal whether lessons are learned or whether the same damage is simply being repackaged with different promises. This episode isn't just about cheating. It's about how we understand human behavior, especially when it collides with pain, trust, and morality, because the way we interpret cheating often mirrors how we see people in general. If we believe that people are their worst mistakes, then we leave no room for growth or redemption. We flatten complex human beings into a single moment and call it truth, and doing so, we lose empathy. But on the other hand, if we believe that people are never responsible, that every action is excusable or dismissible, we lose something just as important, and those are boundaries. We teach ourselves to tolerate harm and to explain away patterns, to stay longer than we should, hoping understanding will eventually replace accountability. This conversation lives in the tension between those two extremes. It asks us to hold nuance without abandoning self-respect, because how we make sense of cheating directly shapes the standards we set for our lives and our relationships. It helps us define what we can forgive without forgetting our worth, what we can accept without betraying ourselves, what we can rebuild when trust is met with real accountability, and what we need to walk away from, even when the love is still present for that person. This isn't about judgment, it's about discernment. It's about learning when empathy is healthy and when it becomes self-abandonment, when patience is growth and when it's just fear of letting go. Because ultimately, understanding human behavior isn't about excusing harm. It's about deciding consciously what we allow, what we protect, and what we no longer negotiate. And that decision shapes the kind of relationships we build and the kind of life that we live. So, might not be the act itself that defines a person, but who they choose to become after. And maybe Just maybe the signs were there long before the betrayal ever happened, and the words they used and the boundaries they ignored, and the way accountability was always just out of reach. In our next episode, we're talking about the early red flags of narcissism, the ones we often miss right at the beginning. They're there, but we miss them. The behaviors we brush off, we rationalize, we excuse, or we mistake for charm, even though they were there all along. We'll also break down emotional hooking. It's a lesser named but powerful narcissistic trait that basically is, how people create deep attachment fast, not to connect, but to secure control over you. And if you've ever looked back and thought, I should have seen this coming, or I wish I would have seen this sooner, this episode is going to be for you. You're not going to want to miss it. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If this episode made you think, reflect, or feel seen, share it with somebody who loves deep conversations like I do. And if you want to continue dialogue or share your thoughts with me, you can always reach me at ce.spillingtea@gmail.com. I'm Colleen, and this is Spilling Tea. Until next time, stay curious, my friends.